I just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining us at ParentMap's Every Child Summit webinar this morning with Learning Outside the Lines with Jonathan Mooney. We're so glad to welcome Jonathan back. Again, I just want to remind participants that if you are able to download the ParentMap app, then you have access to chatting with all the resources that we have available to you, and then you can connect directly. And I also want to thank all the resource participants for joining us for this, our first live, not totally live, resource event for every child and for atypical learners. So Jonathan Mooney has been a nationally recognized advocate and speaker for neurological and physical diversity for 2 decades, inspiring those who live with differences and calling for change. He's published 3 books, The Short Bus, Learning Outside the Lines, and, love this title, Normal Sucks. My name is Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the CEO of ParentMap. I'm also the proud mama to 3 adult children, and I am the bubby to 2 little ones, a 2-month-old baby girl and a 2-year-old grandson. So that's been a lot of fun for me. For those of you that might not be familiar with the ins and out of ParentMap, we are a content-rich parenting site to help you on your parenting journey. I like to describe our content somewhere between broccoli and popcorn, broccoli being the little more serious stuff on health, wellness, and development. That's a lot of what we're doing today. And then the nutritional popcorn of it all, which is the fun out and about adventures that you can do. We very proudly publish print magazines, several parenting books, and host award-winning website that we hope you'll check out at parentmap.com, and now dozens of live events. So before we actually turn it over to Jonathan, a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded so that we can use it for educational purposes and share it throughout different social media streams. And we really hope that you will send some questions our way using the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And once Jonathan has given his talk about a half hour, 35 minutes in, we'll turn over to Q&A. So keep those coming. And with that, I turn it over to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. Hope everybody out there in the virtual space is doing well this morning. I'm so honored and grateful for the opportunity to be a part of this important virtual summit. So before I begin, just a few pieces of housekeeping. As Elaine said, want to give you a sense of how I'd like to spend my time with you. You know, I read recently that the average human attention span is about 15 minutes. And then I read that the average attention span of somebody on a virtual conference on a Tuesday morning is about 15 seconds. So I want to assure you that I'm going to respect that research, keep my talking at you down to a manageable minimum, and then make sure that we have ample time to talk together in the form of questions, conversation, and dialogue. So feel free throughout my presentation to be sending questions or comments via the chat feature to the moderator, and I assure you we will get to those. Okay, second and more important piece of housekeeping. Hey, I just want to give a quick old shout out to my good friends at ParentMap, obviously for the opportunity to be here, but more importantly, for their deep and principled commitment to supporting folks who learn and live outside the lines. You know, people with atypical brains and bodies get the short end of the stick in this world. And that's not a tragedy. That's a crime. And building a more inclusive, equitable, and just world requires us to integrate into our notions of equity and diversity the issues surrounding disability rights. So I want to thank the folks at ParentMap for their deep commitment to social justice for folks who learn and live differently. And I want to thank them for elevating that conversation this morning. So wherever you are, whoever you are, give them a shout out in whatever way works for you. Send them some exploding emojis or some clapping hands or whatever, but find a way to thank them for their contribution to the parenting community in Seattle and beyond. Okay, so with all that said and done, let me kind of just get right to it. I was asked here this morning to share with y'all two things. On one hand, I was asked to share with you my professional work, working with and advocating for folks who learn differently. And, that's really all I've ever done for about 20 years, be an advocate for more inclusive learning environments for folks with differences. So I was asked to share what I've learned in that 20-year professional journey that I know makes a difference in the lives of people who learn differently. I was also asked here, however, to share with you my personal experience as somebody who learns differently, because everything I've done as a professional comes directly from my experience of struggling in school and beyond because of my learning differences. And, I did struggle. I was the kid who had such a hard time sitting still in elementary school that I spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway. I was the kid in middle school who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut that I grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist, in the principal's office. And I was the kid in high school who had such a hard time with reading, and specifically a torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of the day hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. I did not learn to read until I was 12. I couldn't read until I was 12. Growing up, I had every label you could imagine. I was called the bad kid. I was called the lazy kid. I was called the dumb kid. And eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed in third grade with a whole bunch of language-based learning differences, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and others. I was diagnosed in fifth grade with a whole bunch of behavioral disorders, ADHD, and others. And I dropped out of school for about a year in sixth grade. That year when I left school, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety, I struggled with depression, and I had a plan for suicide. After leaving my public school in sixth grade, I spent a year or so in and out of a variety of different educational environments. I went to special education specific programs for a second. I went to alternative schools for a minute. And then, if I'm honest with y'all, I went to no school. I was at home trying to rebuild a sense of efficacy, a sense of value as a human being. So you can imagine that when I got back into middle school and beyond, there were all sorts of low expectations that surrounded me. Low expectations that too often surround folks who don't fit our notion of the good or normal learner. I heard it all. I was told by my dad that I'd be a high school dropout. I was told that I'd be unemployed. I was told by a teacher that I would end up in jail. But I beat those odds. And I was asked here today to talk about that journey of change and transformation, because it goes without saying that none of those very hopeful prophecies came to pass in my life. Opposed to being a high school dropout, I became a college graduate. I graduated from a place called Brown University, which you may know is an Ivy League university, with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature. Opposed to being unemployed, I ended up writing books. First book I wrote at the age of 21 as an undergraduate at Brown. And most importantly, opposed to being an inmate, I became an advocate, somebody who has dedicated his life to making the world a better place for folks who learn and live differently. So I was asked here this morning to talk about that journey of change with you. And that's what I'd like to do. Not only do I want to tell you about what made a difference in my life, but more importantly, I want to tell you what I know in my core makes a difference in the lives of kids who learn differently. So when I think about that question, what can we do as moms and dads, as grandmothers, grandfathers? What can we do as educators? But perhaps most importantly, what can we do as a society to make sure no kid feels stupid, crazy, and lazy? When I think about that question, there are three things that I know you can do tomorrow to make a difference in the life of a kid like me. Let me share those three things with you now, and then we'll open it up for some conversation and dialogue. First and foremost, a journey of empowerment for an atypical learner starts when we redefine who or what we call the problem. You know, for most of human history, normal has been considered good and right, and different has been perceived and treated as deficient. We put the problem in the person, and we turn natural variations in human brains, learning, and behavior into deficiencies inside of the person. You know, I know that very well. I know it personally. You know, I remember when I was first diagnosed, right? And my mom and I were called into the school psychologist's office to get the test results back. And the moment me and my mom walked into that room, it was obvious that everybody in that room thought we were getting tragic, terrible news. You know, the lights were turned down low. There was jazz music playing in the background. There was a box of tissues on the table because we were all there to mourn the death of my normality. We think of different as deficient. And subsequently, young folks like me grow up with the self concept of being deficient as human beings. And we have to challenge that. We have to reframe what we call the problem. The problem isn't the difference. The problem isn't the kid with the difference. The problem is environments that have been built and designed with the myth that we should all be the same. And subsequently, the problem isn't the kid, but the way the kid is treated in that environment. Let me use my life experience as a way to illuminate that paradigm shift of where we put the problem. Let's take this thing called ADD, right? Hang out with the words: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Right there, it puts the problem inside of me. But the reality is, this thing that folks have called a unequivocal deficit or disorder inside of me is really a difference in the truest sense of that word. Now, a difference that has neurobiologically based challenges and limitations. I got that. I'm not naive or in denial about the very real challenges that come with my brain difference. You know, I struggle with paying attention. I have the attention span of a gnat. You know, I struggle to this day with executive functioning. I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead. Okay, I got that. Those are very real challenges. But y'all know what goes hand in hand with those very real challenges? A whole bunch of very real strengths, gifts, and talents that we don't talk enough about. You know, there's good empirical research that shows that people with atypical attention spans are better problem solvers than the general population. You know, I came across a research study recently that showed that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, right? I mean, your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? Forget paying attention. Come get my cat, you know? So it's a difference. with good things, with bad things. It is not, however, my problem. My problem was the school desk. How in God's name could a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you into my relationship with the school desk, and it is a fraught relationship. You know, for some young people, the school desk is a benign piece of school furniture. For me, the school desk might as well be a form of enhanced interrogation that would make Dick Cheney proud. This is my experience at the school desk. This is first grade, 12th grade, Brown University, today, doesn't matter. I see that desk, I see that chair, and before I even sit in it, my hands start to sweat. My face gets all red because I know after 5 seconds at the desk, my foot's gonna start bouncing. 10 seconds at the desk, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds at the desk, oh, I'm gonna bust out the drums. 15 minutes at the desk, oh, it is all over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is shamed because we have a set of institutional norms that confuses or conflates being the good kid with being the compliant kid. And if you're not the compliant kid who raises their hand, keeps their mouth shut, and sits still, something is wrong with you. You know, I got that message at home every night at the dinner table with my dad. It was, Jonathan, stop it, stop it, stop it. What's wrong with you? And I got the same message in many of my classrooms. Not all of my classrooms, don't get me wrong, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in second grade named Mrs. C. I've had many, many gifted, brilliant teachers in my life who I will celebrate with you this morning. Mrs. C is not one of those, okay? She would stop class, she would point at me, all the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what is your problem? We put the problem in the person. When the reality is, the problem wasn't me. The problem wasn't my ADD. The problem was the passive learning environment where young people on average spend 75% of the day sitting still. The problem was the shame and social stigma that emerges and results from being publicly called the problem. That's the problem. Difference disabled by context. That's where the problem really lies. And the same is true with my so-called learning disabilities, right? You all know that the vast majority of young folks receiving special education services are receiving those services for specific language-based learning disabilities. And again, those words imply that something's wrong with those young people's brains. But the reality is my dyslexia and dysgraphia was a difference in the truest sense of the word. And again, I'm not naive about the limitations and challenges that come with my neurobiologically based learning difference. You know, I struggle to this day with handwriting. I struggle to this day with spelling. I spell at a 3rd grade level. And you know what? I still struggle with reading. My phonetic awareness is in the 12th percentile. I confuse words that look alike. Who and how look the same to me. Horse and house look the same to me. When I went to college, I thought Brown University offered a course in orgasmic chemistry, okay? Now imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class, right? So I get it, those are very real challenges, but what goes hand in hand with those very real challenges are a whole bunch of very real strengths, gifts, and talents that we don't talk enough about. Y'all know that folks with learning differences are empirically more creative than the general population. So it's not dyslexia that was my problem. It was the way dyslexia was treated. It was feeling stupid because I learned differently. That was really my problem. And I'll tell you, we got a national crisis on our hands of young folks leaving school feeling dumb. You know, I spend a lot of time talking to young folks, specifically whenever I get a chance, incarcerated young folks. And every time I talk to that group of young people and I ask them to describe themselves at some point in the conversation, they will say that they are dumb, whether it's a white kid, a black kid, indigenous population, East Coast, West Coast, rural, urban, doesn't matter. They got the message that they are stupid. And that's a national tragedy and a national crime. And that crime has an origin, and its origin is a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. You know, we narrowly define what it means to be smart. We confuse being good at school with being smart. But the reality is, those two are very different things. Don't know about y'all, but some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, they didn't read well, they didn't write well, they didn't spell well, but guess what? They could rebuild that car engine from scratch. And that person is just as intelligent and just as valuable as that person with a PhD. But not only do we narrowly define in our culture intelligence, in school, we institutionalize that narrow definition of intelligence. And then we start to track kids into the smart group and the stupid group based on that narrow definition of intelligence. Now, I know they don't call these groups really the smart group or the stupid group. I got that. It's not inherently malicious, but it's there, isn't it? Don't know about you, but I remember in my life, the reading groups, right? It was not hard to tell which reading group was the smart group or the stupid group. You got the blackbirds over there, you got the bluebirds over there, and then over in the annexed trailer building, you got the sparrows, you know? Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, I knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly. And I spent all day chilling out with C Spot Run, and the condors were reading War and Peace, okay? I got it. I'm in the dumb group. But the worst thing is not only do I know that I'm in the dumb group, but guess who else knows I'm in the dumb group? Everybody else knows. Some of the worst memories of my life. We're going over to the other side of the room to pick up my little book. And let's be honest, C Spot Run, not a bad book, you know, nice narrative structure, nice moral tale, but you don't want to be caught dead with Spot when you are 14 years old. Now, do you? Spot's going in the backpack, Spot's going in the shirt, because as I walk by all the other kids, I'm gonna hear it. I hear, Jonathan, go back to your stupid reading group. Jonathan, go back to your dumb reading group. I hear, Jonathan, go back to your retarded reading group. A word which should be treated as the moral equivalent of a racial slur, but too often is not. I hear it every day because we've all been immersed and acculturated into a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. We know what gets you in the smart group, and it ain't your tactile kinesthetic intelligence. It ain't your social emotional IQ. It's not your ability to talk or care or build or create. It's a narrow band of skills that we have decided to call smart. And it leaves so many human beings out, and it wounds those human beings deeply. And that's the problem, not folks who learn differently. So empowerment starts by reframing that problem, by challenging that deeply held belief that if you deviate from the middle of the bell curve, you are deficient. And empowerment is contingent upon all of us, parents, teachers, every one of us, telling young people like me every day that they were wrong about you, that different isn't deficient. Okay, while empowerment starts there, it certainly doesn't end there. That paradigm shift, that reframing of the problem brings me to the second idea that I know empowers young folks who learn differently. It's not just about thinking differently about young folks who learn differently. We have to act differently towards those young folks. And that idea of acting differently, of some do difference for kids who learn different, that was best represented in my life by my mom. You know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Colleen Mooney, right? A lot of folks underestimated my mom. A lot of people, frankly, dismissed my mom. My mom, not a tall woman, right? On a good day, in high heels, on her tippy toes. My mom is 4'11", little Irish bulldog, right? And my mom, she's got this very funny, very high pitched, squeaky voice. My mom totally sounds like Minnie Mouse. But my mom also curses like a truck driver. So if you were a teacher, you were a principal, you were a social worker doing wrong by her son, you did not want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office. But guess where my mom was every single day when things were going wrong for her son? My mom was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? Because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. Only bats could hear her high pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering. My mom understood something. My mom understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. What I needed was somebody to fight for and with me. And those are two very different things. When we put the problem in the person, when we see different as deficient, it leads us down a path of trying to fix the person perceived as deficient. It leads us down the path of trying to make the square peg fit the wrong hole. But you know what? That's a form of violence against folks with differences. That's a demand that they change opposed to the environment around them. And what my mom advocated for every day in my life was the environment to change, not her son. My mom would say to anyone who would listen, she would say, if my son doesn't learn the way he's taught, well, guess what? Teach the way he learns. Now, admittedly, that's a paraphrase because when my mom said it, there were a whole bunch of F-bombs in it that I've edited out. But nonetheless, that's what she stood for. She stood for this idea that it's the environment that should change and not the person. And that's what we need to be advocates for in our own children's life, in the life of our students, and ultimately what we collectively as a community need to advocate for to change the environment to make it work for more types of learners. So as we embark on that journey of advocacy, what should we be fighting for around environmental change for young folks? Well, there's a few things. Number one, we should be advocating for services that are young people's rights by law. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act of 1974, it stipulates that if you got an atypical brain and body, you have a right to an education that is personalized and individualized. And that means that you get some things that other folks don't get. If you read in the 12th percentile, it is fair that you get extra reading support. Fair and equity does not mean equal. People who need more should get more in school. And we need to advocate for that. We need to advocate it for all students who have learning and attentional and neurodiversities. But ultimately, we need to be more focused and intentional in our advocacy on behalf of Black and Brown LGBTQ plus folks who learn differently, because they're often left out. So let's be advocates for that right, for services around an individualized education. But we got to go beyond just being advocates for services. We also need to advocate for accommodations. Accommodations are different from services. That notion of accommodating difference, it stems or originates from the Americans with Disabilities Act, 1992, celebrating its 30th anniversary in existence. And that piece of radical civil rights legislation mandates that our institutions, our places of work, our schools have a ethical obligation and, frankly, a legal obligation to build ramps to create access. Literal ramps, but then also metaphorical ramps to change the environment to accommodate folks with differences and not fix or remediate those differences. Accommodations in my life made all the difference. I'm somebody who needs the accommodation of text to speech. Back in my day, the text to speech accommodation was books on tape. The thing was so big, you had to put it into a backpack and plug it into a generator, right? But nowadays, we got the world's literature, the world's libraries in our pockets on our phones. Advocate for students' rights to access information in a way that's right for them. I had the accommodation of speech to text. Back in my day, that was the fancy technology of me saying stuff to my mom and she would write it down for me. But we were constantly made to feel like we were cheating and made to feel ashamed of that. But if I don't have that accommodation, I dumb everything down. When I was a kid, I would only write sentences or paragraphs with the words that I could find on posters in the room. And if I couldn't figure out how to write a sentence with the words on the Dare poster in the back of the room, I would scribble so nobody could see my mistakes. And then guess what? They thought I was dumb, that I had nothing to say and nothing to contribute. But when I could talk it out, my ideas could flourish. Every single human being has a right to express themselves in a way that's right for them. And last but not least, I had accommodations around assessment. The most common, one of the most impactful, is time extensions on exams. And that matters. If you read in the 12th percentile, it's not fair that you have the same amount of time as the kid who doesn't. But why does time matter? Because the reality is, when we give a time exam, we're not assessing how well somebody knows something. We are assessing how fast they know it. And there is no pedagogical reason that how fast I know something should be more important than how well I know it. We are not educating a generation of Jeopardy contestants, right? So we need to open up assessment and ultimately have multiple modes of assessment that assess the whole learner and not just parts of the learner. Those assessment accommodations mattered to me. But you know what? My last challenge for you is to be an advocate to go beyond accommodations, because accommodation has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. It's kind of like that word tolerance, right? We tolerate something we're all not that happy about. Let me put it this way. When my mother-in-law comes to town, I don't celebrate her visit. I accommodate her visit, right? So what we need to fight for is universal design of education. The idea, the North Star, the bold, ambitious goal of designing our environments, not around the myth of normal, but the reality of human difference. And that's our work together. So in conclusion, as we switch gears to hear your questions and your comments, let's be those advocates in young folks' life. Let's stand for the idea that different isn't deficient. Let's fight for the idea that it's not the person who should have to change, but the environment around the person. But perhaps most importantly, let's, as a community, as a movement, let's fight for every single human being's right to be different. Okay, thank you all so much. That's my talking at you. Let's switch gears so we can talk together. I welcome your questions and your comments. I will at the end give you all my email address. So if you have questions that you can't or don't want to ask in this forum, you can ask me personally after the fact. So let's open it up to some conversation.
Okay, Jonathan. So first of all, thank you for answering my first question, which is, I wish you could see all the faces of the people on here, because I have been trying to field the most enthusiastic, energized questions because so many people identify with your story and your passionate way of delivering your experience. There's a loud applause in the background that you just can't hear. So
Okay,
I can't thank you enough. And personally, I really identify, and the challenges that we might have faced ourselves as learners, and how to be advocates for our kids. So there's a lot of questions. So I'm just gonna start with, many people are wondering your own journey to university and getting to an Ivy League school. Can you talk a little bit more about that and the impact clearly that your mother had in navigating so many systems?
Yeah, I'm happy to reflect on my journey to Brown, and I appreciate you not saying what you were probably thinking, which is, did they make a mistake in the admissions? Which is, so I got it. It's cool. It's all good. Let me talk about that journey. Let me talk about that journey first, just chronologically and sequentially, so we can kind of fill in some gaps. My secondary experience, in high school, my mom would always say to me, Jonathan, survive school and thrive in life. And, that may sound a little bit like a pessimistic thing to say, but you know what? I actually heard that as a very aspirational and optimistic thing to say. The reality is that more Fortune 500 companies are run by C students than by valedictorians. 50%, this is a staggering statistic that I want people to hear. Almost 50% of small businesses in America are run or founded by somebody with a language-based learning difference. So the engine of the American economy, small business, is fueled by that kid who used to be hiding in the bathroom. So what my mom was trying to tell me is school isn't life. And she was right. There's a new study out by Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, came out 2 days ago. And if people email me, I'll send it to you. And this study looked at what are the factors that lead to success in employment. And the study concluded that the factors that lead to success in the real world of work, about 20% of those are academic skills and 80% are non-cognitive personal traits. Your ability to collaborate, your ability to be passionate, your ability to be a team member, things along those lines. And those aren't what we're cultivating in traditional schools. So my mom's message was, get through it, man, you'll hit your stride. So I survived high school with that in mind. I was accommodated in places with some amazing teachers, and I want to celebrate and recognize those by name. A teacher named Mr. Starkey. Wherever you are, Mr. S, man, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. You were one of those teachers that accommodated me. Unfortunately, he was one of 6. And I wasn't accommodated more often than not in high school. And so my transcript looks like this. Accommodation, do well. Non-accommodation, don't do well. So I went to a university before Brown. I went there on soccer scholarship. That's what kept me going. It was my island of competency. I wanted to be a Division I soccer player, and I achieved that goal. And when I got to that college, I had a renaissance in my education, and that renaissance had three catalysts. One, higher education is different than K-12 education. You get to choose what you take, and that matters a lot to the neurodiverse, because we're learners who are successful when we are intrinsically motivated by a subject matter. Number two, accommodations are often less stigmatizing in higher education. And I want anyone out there listening now to know that every single college and university and place of work in America is required to give accommodations from the ADA. So I was accommodated for the first time and advocated for myself. And the third is I kind of hit my stride. The neurodiverse are often late bloomers. My mom used to read a book to me when I was a kid called Leo the Late Bloomer. And it's a children's book about a lion that can't do things. It's for 4-year-olds. And my mom read it every day until I was 18 to me. She gave me that message of you'll hit your stride. And that happened in my late teens, early 20s. And so I decided to transfer to Brown. The thing you should know about transferring is if you transfer from a 2-year college to Harvard, a state school to a university, whatever, they don't look at your high school grades. They don't look at your SAT scores. They look at how you did in that institution of higher education. And so you get a do-over in many respects. And that's the do-over I got. Now, my experience at Brown, why Brown? It wasn't because it was a fancy school. It was because of its approach to learning. There are no core requirements at Brown. Take whatever you want to take. Don't take what you don't want to take. And that's how they roll there. And that's a lesson for all of us, which is it's not about finding the best college. It's about finding the right college. And one of the things I am so optimistic about is there is a post-secondary experience for every single learner out there. You don't have to go to college to be successful nowadays. Somewhere close to 19% of Google's workforce did not go to college. So there's a whole bunch of different ways to launch a successful adult life. You find the way that's right for you, your brain, your way to learn. Hope I didn't lose folks there. You all
sorry.
Still there?
Sorry. Yes, totally.
Yeah, you thought I had more to go too. I did. I got like 2 more hours of talking. So
I'm fielding all these questions. So what I'm going to do, because we have a hard stop at 11, is I'm going to read a couple questions to you that you can put together. And
Sure.
I'm going to thank you in advance for your generous offer, because you will be getting a lot of emails.
Hope so.
So first of all, can we get your mom to speak?
Only if you're comfortable with some F-bombs. If you are, then let's bring her on board.
I don't want to get too personal, but I have gifted every one of my relatives an F-bomb because of how that's in our background. So more on that. Anyway, how do you think educators can identify children early that are first having problems and engage parents to believe that atypical behavior is fine? Number one. Number two, are you taking medication as an adult for your ADD? Let's start with those two.
Okay, and out of respect to the number of questions, I'll try to keep my responses fairly short. So happy to follow up via email. So how can we identify young folks early, and perhaps more importantly, and I think this is really insightful distinction. Share that information with parents in a non-deficit, non-pathology way. Well, first of all, look, you don't need a PhD and you don't need $5,000 of assessment often to see some early identifiers that a learner is an atypical learner. The kid bouncing their foot, the young person who has great discrepancies between, let's say, verbal output and writing output. The kid who talks, and then what comes out, a 3-line sentence. Those are pretty reliable markers that we got an atypical learner right there on the attention side and the learning side. And then there's others as it pertains to the Asperger's autism continuum, etc. the more important thing, and I think the more nuance, is how do we bring that to parents in a way that it's helpful information? I remember that diagnosis moment when it was a death for my normality. That ain't the way to do it. Let me give you the way to do it. I had a teacher in third grade named Mr. R. He was a lifesaver for me. And I remember one day he pulled my mom aside. He said, "Hey, Colleen, I heard that Jonathan's dyslexic. Congratulations." My daughter is too, and she's in college. Do you see how different that is from the tissues on the table and the jazz music in the background? That's an asset-based approach that sees this as difference, not deficiency. So the more that you can lead out there as an educator with, "Hey, I heard this guy Jonathan Mooney, he's doing all right in life, and he reminds me of your child." Well, hey, that's a different conversation than, "Oh, let me tell you something's up with your kid and there's a problem." So that's a framework that I would use. Now, as it pertains to medication stuff, like what medication or what medications am I on right now, and where can you buy some, right? Here's my journey with medication. I have been prescribed it throughout the entirety of my life, like most recently yesterday. However, my mom did not see it as a tool that she wanted to utilize. And then in my adult life, college and beyond, I didn't see it as a tool that I wanted to use in my life. That's my personal experience. Let me level up and talk a little bit about my opinion on it, based in the research that I've seen. I think of medication as a valuable tool for some folks. However, it is not the only tool, nor should it be the first tool that we go to. There is a wonderful meta-analysis by the New England Journal of Medicine around stimulant-based medication, anxiety, and depression. Different studies looking at all the studies of the studies. And that those studies determined that diet, exercise, accommodations in the classroom, and mindfulness are as effective and often more effective than the medications often used or prescribed. That's not to say for some folks that the fifth tool of medication isn't helpful. It is to say, let's explore those first four first, and then let's go to medication as a tool if we need it. But if we need it, there's no shame in it. I'm a pragmatist in that sense, that we should be pursuing things that lead to young people having a better sense of well-being, but not doing their homework better. Sometimes we're using medication for compliance, not well-being. And we need to be cognizant of that line. And we need to be using the tools that lead to young folks feeling more successful, feeling like they're thriving in life, not just so they can sit still better.
Great. There's a bunch of, so much of, again, what you experience. People are asking a lot of questions around how do you keep your kid, especially during COVID-19, especially during virtual learning, feeling confident and not shutting down. And there, the struggle is just tougher than it's ever been.
It is. Look, I'm a bright side kind of guy. I recognize the moment of national tragedy that we're in, and I fundamentally try to live my life by, changing the things that need to be changed and being an advocate for change, and then trying to find not what I can't do, but what I can do in any circumstance. And I think what we can do right now as parents is two things. One, we need to use this distance learning as an opportunity to do strength and interest-based learning for young folks. I talk to school districts all around the country in this format, wrestling with this. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to just cram school into a little screen. And you know what? school didn't work for about half your kids to begin with. Why do you think it's going to work in this little screen? It's like yelling at a deaf person louder. It doesn't work. So we need to use this opportunity to do something different. And I think that different has to be in education and home-based learning driven by people's strengths, interests, and talents. And I've been on that mission for strength-based education for 20 years because of a teacher named Mr. R. The same guy who said, "Congratulations, you're dyslexic," was the guy who told me that I could be a writer. And when I said, "I can't be a writer, Mr. R, because I can't spell," the guy looked at me and said, "Screw spelling, Jonathan. That's why I'm here." And he flipped the deficit script. So any way that we can put aside the academic content stuff in this moment of time and do interest-based learning, which, by the way, will facilitate academic content learning. It's not an and or, it's a both. And I know that that sounds overwhelming for folks. So I want to give you a resource out there. There's a wonderful platform that I've been a part of now for about 3 years called Thrively. It's like the word thrive, but L-Y, Thrively. And it facilitates interest and strength-based journeys for young folks and young adults. So it's Thrively. You can find it online. It's thrively.com. So I think that's one of the things that we can do. Second thing I want to put out there is, look, your relationship with your child is the single most important thing to nurture and tend to. I would not spend one moment of that relational capital fighting about homework, fighting about a Zoom meeting, fighting about, school stuff. I wouldn't. Because you know what? We are on the precipice of a second pandemic. And that second pandemic is the youth well-being crisis, which was happening pre-COVID and has now been accelerated by the social distance necessary, but nonetheless, an unattended consequence is exacerbating anxiety, depression, and self-harm amongst young people. And school could wait. Tend to your relationship with your child. When I was a kid, my mom and I used to be told I had to spend all my time fixing my spelling, do the flashcards, draw the words in the sand, build the words in the blocks, do interpretive dance to get the words in. And then one day my mom said, "Jonathan, forget this. We're going to ditch school, not do the spelling test, and go to the zoo," because I loved animals. And I'll tell you right now, I am alive today because of that. And that's what we need to hold on to, our relationship and a learning journey that's about interest and passion. And let's cultivate those two and let's tend to those. And our kids will be okay.
That's a great segue in ditch the academic side to a bunch of questions around what other kinds of routines, because kids need that, but the routine of being in front of a screen all day just isn't cutting it. What kind of other routines, from exercise, adventure, and learning, you're naming one, going to the zoo, were really helpful, or can you recommend? Because I think parents are just pulling it, trying to figure this out.
Yeah. Look, I think I mentioned them, but they're always important to mention again. The role of exercise, and I don't mean you got to be a professional soccer player. I don't mean you got to go be training for a triathlon, but the role of physical activity in a child's well-being and in their learning is indisputable and essential. And we need to be intentional in cultivating that and supporting that. And I will say, and I don't mean to get on my soapbox here for a second, but we need public policy that nurtures that for children in this age of social distance. And I think that there has been a policy tilt that has not kept child well-being front and center to our decision-making. Let me give you an example. I live in Santa Monica. The beach is 3 blocks from where I live. There is zero research that supports outdoor transmission on the beach. That just doesn't exist. And yet the city of Santa Monica has bulldozed all of their volleyball nets and covered them in sand. Is that a public policy that's supporting, people being safe, but also tending to their well-being? It is not. And so I think we need to be advocates again for the safe and reasonable policies that allow children to be outside. If that means having to close streets, because look, it's hard for me. I have 3 kids doing distance learning. I live in a townhouse. Can I send my kids out to the street? No, because the traffic is terrible. So we need to close streets so kids can play and be safe. So we need to be advocates for that moving forward. Mindfulness, I said it before, it's not just because I live in Santa Monica and I'm a hippy dippy. It matters, like just taking that time. The research is unequivocal around that. And nature, the more that we can spend time in nature. There was a wonderful book about the nature deficit that predated the COVID challenge, about how young folks were not getting outside and how we are hardwired to need and crave nature and to spend time in it. And again, I take issue with public policy in California, Southern California, where much of the access to nature was closed. And it's slowly reopening, and we got to change that. And we need to pursue policies for children that allow them to exercise, be out in nature, and create time for mindfulness and put that academic content aside for a little bit.
Fantastic. So with our serious hard stop at 11, this will be our last question. What do you mean exactly when you say disability is diversity, and why does that matter so much in our current climate?
Yeah, look, let me give you an example. We see disability as a form of personal limitation and pathology inside of a person, not as an issue of society. And we have not integrated, elevated the experience of folks with atypical brains and bodies through the lens of social justice and equity and equality. Give you a good example of that. My alma mater, who I'm proud to be an alum from Brown University. They have a long history of equity and inclusion for a continuum of folks. About 5 years ago, they did an institutional audit trying to understand where they could do better on issues of diversity. The institutional audit gave a 500-page report about places they can do better. Guess how many times the word disability or neurodiversity was mentioned in that 500-page report? 0. We don't think about it that way. So one of the things that we should advocate for is integrating diverse brains and bodies in our corporate and institutional diversity initiatives. As we wrestle with building a more diverse and equitable society, an inclusive society, folks with different brains and bodies must be included, not excluded from that conversation. And when we do that, we have an opportunity to really embed universal design, the idea of building environments that work not for some, but all, central to what we build as a society. And that's what real equity, real social justice means.
Fantastic. Really, I just want to thank you. I know I speak for everyone that your talk is so empowering and essential. Parents, first and foremost, your mother is going to be in everybody's heart and mind as a role model. So thank you for sharing that, Jonathan. Thank you for being willing to communicate directly with everyone who attended. Yep. And then I really want to encourage everyone who is attending to check out the resources on the Every Child event, because there are numerous specific resources for you to connect with directly and ask more questions to providers. So we hope you'll also join us at 11:10 for SOS for Parents in the Trenches with Deborah Reber. And then again tonight we have Laura Kastner, Getting to Calm While Pandemic Parenting. And then at 7 something, we have a panel with someone from the Seattle Public Schools, the head of the ADHD clinic at Seattle Children's, and Howard Eaton from Eaton Schools. So thank you again. And Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you. Email address is jonathanmooney@me.com. Hey, I'm going to go right to that website and download the app for ParentMap because this is essential. There's no handbook for being a parent, and we need community, and we need to help each other through these difficult times, and ParentMap is playing an invaluable, not just public service, but is playing an invaluable role in creating a world in which more kids thrive. So thanks so much for letting me be a part of that work today, a small part of that work, and I wish you well, and I look forward to hearing
Thank you.
from anyone and everyone who was a part of this today.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.